Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. That was only a very short break since the last part of the session with Dark Matter Labs. Now, I'm really excited again for this afternoon talk because, well, for lots of reasons. Alastair and Open Systems Lab and WikiHouse are part of the 00 family, so we've kind of known and been connected to the work for many years, and there's been so much inspiration there. Also because I basically, Alice is going to laugh at this, but I basically live for the next installation and the next chapter of the land story. I really do. I'm like, oh, I wonder what Alice is thinking right now and what's going to come next. But then just before backstage, the whole talk just took a whole new moment and new light for me, because Alistair said, actually, I'm not going to share any slides like I normally do. Today I'm going to give the talk that if I had an hour left to live, it would be the talk that I gave, which now makes me like incredibly excited to hear about this. And also he promised us that if he survives, he might turn it into an actual talk as well. So welcome to Alastair, and you're going to be with him for the next half an hour, and I'll pop backstage and I'll come back for questions. Get your questions in, because you know if they get in too late, we're just not having enough time. So please do. Thanks so much, Alastair, and over to you.
First, I just want to start by saying thank you so much to Immy and the team. I've been sort of dipping in whenever I could over the last 2 days, and it's just amazing. You've turned a two-dimensional screen into a 10-dimensional space somehow. So extraordinary. I'm just incredibly grateful to have this chance to get this off my chest for half an hour. But yeah, please forgive me. So I heard a line of a poem recently by an American poet called Theodore Roethker, and it's stuck in my head ever since. In a dark time, the eye begins to see, and it's true, isn't it? Like, crises and tragedies have this effect of revealing our priorities, but it's including to us. But also they have this effect of stripping off the wallpaper of society and revealing the hidden structures underneath. And, in the case of the UK and US, what COVID has done, when you look at the tragic impact that it's had compared with, for example, Taiwan or New Zealand, is it's revealed these deep underlying health conditions in our society, in our economy, in our democracy, right? It's exposed, a government machine that's been so weakened by decades of outsourcing and intellectual capture that it literally is no longer has the capacity to act effectively to meet strategic social aims, even when it now needs to, because it hasn't been believing in that it needs to do that. And we've seen that in these kind of mad procurement failures. It's exposed the fragility of our social infrastructure, again, from decades of being mined away, an overstretched NHS, millions of people living in dark, tiny, cramped homes, neighborhoods that are simply not, there was a good Wired piece about this, they're simply not fit for living in for any extended period of time, often with no outdoor space and very limited access to green space. It has exposed deep structural racial injustice. I mean, if you'd asked most white people, just a couple of months ago or less, whether Britain has an issue of structural racism, a lot of people have said, well, not in the same way that America does. And then it turns out that if you're from an ethnic minority, you're twice as likely to die from COVID than if you're white. And if you're black, you're 4 times more likely to die. And why? Because if you belong to one of those groups, you're significantly more likely to be in low-paid service sector work, significantly more likely to live in a deprived neighborhood or an overcrowded home, significantly more likely to be suffering from respiratory illness, diabetes, obesity, all of which we know are tied to environmental factors. It's exposed this other underlying epidemic of loneliness, depression, domestic abuse. Domestic abuse has gone up 49% in lockdown. Around 280,000 people were living homeless. 1 in 5 households in the UK and 1 in 3 children living in poverty. Millions of parents going without meals to feed their children in lockdown. This in one of the wealthiest, most technologically advanced societies in the world. And of course, you can say the same thing about what it's exposed in our economy, right? Even before COVID came along, we had flatlining productivity, record low levels of investment, record levels of debt, hollowed out real economy, high streets failing everywhere you look, economy massively centralized around London, this kind of persistent and worsening north-south divide, manufacturing outsourced, obsolete construction industries, right? But there was one deep structure that I think has been exposed with a vivid clarity during COVID in a way I've not seen before, and that was to do with the cost of housing, right? So we know we have this deep housing crisis. The cost of housing has spiraled by more than 5,000%. Whole generation locked out of owning their homes. In the first week of that lockdown, we had this thing where Treasury were like, right, we've got to press the pause button on the whole economy. That's how we're going to try and keep it alive, right? So people are going to lose their incomes, and we got to, for both businesses and households, the trick was to then try and pause the outgoings as well as much as possible. And so for people who owned a home with a mortgage, that was pretty easy, right? You make sure that people could ask for a mortgage holiday. And then what they found is there was one form of outgoing that the single biggest outgoing for most families every month that they couldn't pause, which is rent. And so we found ourselves confronted by this crazy situation in which, as taxpayers, we were pouring billions of pounds of life support into the economy, and a huge chunk of it was just being paid on to private landlords. It's like having if the economy was a bucket, it's like having a huge hole in the bottom of the bucket, or rather the top of the bucket, right? Probably a bad analogy. So inevitably, with the new clarity, people began asking this question of, well, wait a minute. And the question had been there all along, which is, well, what work is it exactly that we're paying landlords to do? And of course, the answer is basically nothing. We're paying them to not evict us. And that's extraordinary realization that, we're in a country that believes so strongly in fairness, hard work, enterprise, innovation, meritocracy, and yet the single biggest cost burden on most businesses, ultimately by salaries, and most households, is a kind of fee paid by poor people to rich people for nothing, just for having money in the first place. And that fee has been going up and up and up and up. Now, mostly when we talk about this situation, we refer to it as the housing crisis, right? That's the language that we use. But the truth of it is that, of course, actually our housing crisis is actually a land crisis, right? If you own a house worth £400,000, lucky you, most of that value is not in the house, right? It's the land. The house is just a heap of bricks. By the way, if you want to test this theory, try putting your house onto the back of a truck and seeing how much you can get for it on eBay, right? And it's not even really a land crisis, it's a land system. It's the rules of the game hard-coded into the firmware of our society and our economy. And all of the systemic crises I've spoken about so far, yes, they are incredibly complex, they're incredibly interlinked. Social resilience, health, climate, economy, democracy, they're all intertwined, but every single one of them has its roots in this land system. The more I've looked at this, the more I find it impossible not to believe that restructuring that land system is the single most important reform project of this century. And hopefully in about 25 minutes time, so will you. Like all forward-looking journeys, we have to start by looking backwards. Weirdly enough, the land system that we still have in the UK today in 2020 has its origins in a problem very specific to medieval kings, which is basically how do I fund military campaigns and defense without keeping a standing army? Because standing armies are really expensive. And it was William the Conqueror who perfected the answer, and the answer was a piece of paper. And basically what you do, the piece of paper is an agreement between the crown and a noble, a lord, saying, if you provide me an army for military campaigns whenever I ask, in exchange, I will grant you monopoly over your own private fiefdom, where you can levy taxes, and those taxes can be as high as people can bear to pay. So effectively, and that tax is rent, right? So effectively, rent is the original tax paid via lords to the king. And in fact, the word feudal comes from the Latin feudalis, for fee. So literally the whole system of government was based on rent. But if you're a king, there's only three groups of people that you're basically scared of, which is other kings, your own family, and nobles, right? The lords. So over time, landowners used this fear to essentially extract a series of concessions from various monarchs. So essentially, increasingly, taxes were levied directly onto people and businesses, leaving them as the landowners with this privatized tax, this monopoly right over this privatized tax. So what you're left with is a set of pure power relations, right? It's an enforced system of servitude and control. And one of the most famous economists who talks about this is the economist Henry George. And in his book, Progress and Poverty, he makes this point really clearly, which is like, well, if you take an imaginary island with 100 people on it, and you make one of them master of all of them, and one of them the master and 99 of them slaves, or you make one of them the landlord and the rest of them tenants, there's very, very little difference between the two, right? It's essentially a diluted version of slavery because one still has absolute control over the lives of the other. Fast forward a few hundred years to the post-Civil War America, and that is exactly what played out. So when plantation owners could no longer own slaves anymore, what they said was, okay, they narrowed the definition, right, to payment. So they said, okay, I'll pay you $2 a day, say, I don't know what it was, right? I'll pay you $2 a day, but by the way, I own the land. And the rent is, guess what, $2 a day. Which, as an interesting side story, led to the invention of this really quite cool thing called chattel houses. So Google them sometime. They're basically like kit houses that people made to kind of extract freedoms so that they could basically disassemble their house and move it off the land to try and kind of win back this you know, some kind of escape from this thing. But fast forward again to today, and land is still the fundamental mechanism behind racial inequality, right? Davita Davison spoke on Monday. You know, ask her the story of those empty houses in Detroit. All across the UK and the US, to be blunt, there are tenants with black and brown skin paying rent to landlords and mortgage lenders with white skin, basically, or they're commuting for hours, right? Whatever it might be. So I imagine probably all of you have seen the speech made a couple of weeks ago by a young American writer called Kimberly Jones, which is absolutely the most eloquent piece of public speaking I've seen in a very, very long time. And she uses this incredible image of getting white people to understand, imagine what it's like to play 400 rounds of the game of Monopoly, but with the game rigged against you. I just thought, and as a white person, I was like, enforced by violence, right? There's an interesting backstory, by the way, to that story, because some of you may know that the game Monopoly was originally invented by a lady called Elizabeth Magie. It was originally called the Landlord's Game, and it was basically invented so that one day somebody could make the speech that Kimberly Jones just did, which is pretty cool. So broadly speaking, you have this power relationship, right? And broadly speaking, there are two positions in this relationship. There's the tenant and there's the landlord, right? And over time, what happened is the landlord role, that this piece of paper became a tradable asset, so, and as well as an inheritable one. So you can literally buy the right to extract taxes from people. And it's amazing to me that we don't find it weird that this history is hiding in plain sight in our own language. We still call them landlords, right? Which is mental. But of course, this is politically really, really hard to sustain, this kind of disparity. So over time, what you saw was the slow emergence of a third position in this kind of diagram, which was where you can get together enough money to effectively buy your own freedom from rent for life. And again, that's why it's called freehold. The free in freehold is not free as in no cost. It's free as in liberty. And that in turn is the reason why house prices have exploded in the UK, because remember that the rent you pay is not determined by what it costs to produce the land, right? The land was already there. Ownership is a piece of paper. It doesn't cost anything to produce. It's determined by what somebody somewhere can bear to pay. This is what Adam Smith and David Ricardo theorized and called the law of rent. So if the community become wealthier, or say because of trade or enterprise, or if other new people arrive with more money, then the rents go up. And in theory, that should be a pretty linear system, right? Basically, when the travelers on the road get wealthier, so do the highwaymen. But this hunger for economic freedom, this desperation to escape and have freehold, it creates a demand market for debt, because people will desperately borrow as much as they can to buy their way to this liberty. So what happened in the 1970s through to 2008 was that basically governments massively deregulated private mortgage lenders so they could create more and more and more and more debt at lower and lower interest rates. And because people could borrow more, they could spend more, and because they could spend more, house prices went up. And because house prices went up, the mortgage lenders said, oh, cool, we can give out even more debt against this security. So we went on this mad upward spiral of land price inflation, far outstripping, 5,000% since the 1970s, far outstripping wages or anything like that. If you've seen the film Big Short, you already know this story. In 2008, it crashed, right? Or kind of did it, right? Because what happened in 2008 is that instead of grabbing the opportunity to sort of do a managed de-escalation from this crisis, the UK government basically stepped in to reinflate the bubble, or at least prop it up. Well, actually first prop it up and then reinflate it, which was basically like putting a massive advert banner over Britain that said, rich people of the world, stop investing in actual productive things and enterprises, just park your money in UK land. It's free money. We'll underwrite the risk. And you can even extract rent from our citizens. So what we've seen since 2008 to now is this massive surge in landlordism and correspondingly a drop in ownership, right? Because there's a finite number of these properties, these pieces of land that you can live on. Which leads us to the point where we are today, which is where the combined, or I should say were, because we don't know what, it's probably crashing right now, but we don't know how much. But at last time of looking, the combined value of UK property rights, these pieces of paper, these privatized taxation rights, is £8.6 trillion, which is 83% of the total wealth of the UK. Think about that. All the other businesses, everything, all the stuff in the UK is hardly anything compared to the value of these land taxation rights. By the way, the equivalent figure globally is 280 trillion. To put that in perspective, all the gold in the world is only worth about 7 trillion. All the data held by all the Silicon Valley companies is only worth about 3 trillion. 280 trillion. This is huge. This is the biggest show in town. And of course, we've talked about this as a form of wealth, but it's not a wealth, right? It's a privatized tax on every form of social and economic activity. And so every year in the UK, or at least last year, we spent £71 billion on rent collectively, 67 billion on mortgage payments. That's enough to run a whole second NHS. Or whatever, right? Imagine what we could do with that. And the weird thing is that's not even the worst of it, or it's pretty bad. But that's not all of it. It also falls back onto the taxpayer in the form of housing benefit bill and emergency housing costs. So last year, the housing benefit bill in the UK was £23 billion, which is more than we spent on highways, policing and military equipment put together, just to rent back our own land from private landlords. All goes back to land. So, you know, this isn't just a kind of an affront to society. It's completely it's an affront to reason, right? Like, and very straightforwardly, you know, the more we have to spend on the cost of land, the more expensive land is, the less we have to spend on everything else, which is buildings, improvements, activities that happen on the land, every form of human enterprise and progress. You know, this land system isn't making us wealthy. It's literally impoverishing us. It is a manufactured form of poverty. So at this point, I'll have a drink. You might reasonably ask, well, wait a minute. If these monopoly land rights are so expensive, it must be because they're scarce, right? Well, there's loads of land, right? We're only about, housing is only about 1% of the land area of the UK, which is about the same as golf courses. So why don't we just create more land rights? We could just use the planning system to just open up the green belt. Solved. No, because what we're talking about, when we're talking about land value, it's not really the land we're talking about. Land is just mud. Like, unless it has coal or some other gift from nature in it, mud is mud. And the mud in Westminster is no better than the mud in Warwickshire, but it costs millions and millions of pounds more. What you're paying for when you're paying for land value is actually location value. You're paying, this is what, you know, the dark matter team were talking about. You're paying for its access to infrastructure, to proximity to jobs, to schools, trains, culture, community infrastructure, green space, just being in a trendy postcode, you know, being near beautiful people, whatever. And one of the best speeches ever made on this subject was made in 1909, and it was called The Mother of All Monopolies, and it contained this line: roads are made, streets are made, services are improved, electric light turns night into day, water is brought from reservoirs 100 miles off the mountains, and all the while the landlord sits still. So not one of these improvements does the land monopolist contribute, and yet by every one of them, the value of his land is enhanced. He renders no service to the community. He contributes nothing to the general welfare. He contributes nothing to the process from which his own enrichment is derived. I think, wow, who is this guy? Is this Karl Marx? The person who gave that speech was Winston Churchill. Now, I don't say this as any kind of promotion of his character, right? I think it's quite useful that right now he's quite a useful symbol for the way that Britain is having to quite seriously reassess these deep contradictions in its own national character. But what I mean to show is that this is not a left versus right issue, right? It runs much deeper than that. Incidentally, shortly after making that speech, he and the Prime Minister Asquith got a radical land reform bill through the House of Commons, only for it to be defeated in, you guessed it, the House of Lords. The underlying point is really, really important, and we have to imprint this on our souls, which is that land value is not created by the owner of the land. It's created by the taxpayer through our investment into infrastructure, and by the activity of the community, and through democracy, through our collective consent for development. And yet our current land system, this legacy feudal land system, allows that public value to be privately captured and monopolized. It's not just landlords that are doing this, right? It's in form of rents. It's also monopolized by freeholders. So, for example, if you live near an Ofsted rated excellent school, it adds between £40,000 and £100,000 to the value of residential property. And yet we tell ourselves that our system of state education has no school fees. And then we wonder why children from deprived backgrounds struggle, or I was reflecting on this, and it's funny that, the phrase the postcode lottery, and it's like, wait a minute, it's not a lottery at all, it's a stitch up. Because you're just put that the school fees are in the land. And this then is where we get to the kind of the final twist of the knife, which is this fatal one, which is because we allow land value uplifts to be captured by the current owner, we basically have created a multi-billion-dollar land speculation market, which is essentially the economic equivalent of ticket touts at a concert. Basically, what you do is you buy up all possible development land before it has planning permission, and then when the government come in and install infrastructure and give planning permission, its value suddenly shoots up from a few £1,000s a hectare to a few £1,000,000 a hectare. And then what you do is you then build the rubbish, ugliest, smallest, cheapest, crappiest houses you can, least sustainable homes that you can get away with, swimming in a sea of tarmac, and you negotiate down the amount of community infrastructure or business space that you provide to zero, ideally, and this is the dark open secret. Jack mentioned this. This is the dark open secret at the heart of the built environment today, which is that pretty much everyone actually agrees on what we want from our cities and from our places. We want zero carbon. We want circular homes. We want resilient communities living in green, walkable, prosperous neighborhoods. We want people to be able to care for each other. We want to create innovative green construction industry. And yet our land system is perfectly designed to never do it. For example, we know that buildings are responsible for about 40% of all carbon emissions. Now, some of that is the operational energy. It's quite hard to bring that down because it includes existing buildings. But 11% of the UK's carbon emissions is embodied carbon. Now, we could get that to zero tomorrow, but we're not doing it because it's not in the interest of this business model to do that. Again, to quote the Churchill speech, the land monopolist reaps their reward not in exact proportion, not to the service, but to the disservice done to the community. And I want to be clear, this is not because landlords and developers are not perfectly decent, well-intentioned people. Most of them are. I've been one, so I hope they are, right? This is not about the players. It's not about punishing anyone. It's about fixing a broken game. It's about rehabilitating ourselves, because the game that we're all currently locked into is taking us over a cliff. Land monopoly is eating our economy, it's eating our society, it's eating our environment, and yet to a lot of people it's still invisible. And this, one of the most amazing things about this system is that literally no one on either the left or the right has a reasonable economic or philosophical justification for it. You won't find one. It's simply an accident of history. It's an obsolete social contract, this legacy of the feudal system, which has just persisted into our DNA through unconsciousness, through vested interests, through corruption, and through obfuscation, because people want to have power over other people. And we have to fix it. So, reasonably briefly, if we were to go back to the drawing board completely and to design a new land system from scratch, what might it look like? And helpfully, pretty much every major economist and philosopher who's ever looked seriously at this question, from Marx to Milton Friedman, Matt Zucato to Martin Luther King, Adam Smith to Abraham Lincoln, from ancient Israelites to Ellen Ostrom, has always come back with the same basic principle, which is that land is a natural commons, it belongs to everyone, and that land rents should be recaptured by the community who create the value in the first place. So basically, as a landowner, you shouldn't be a lord over anyone. You should be the steward of that piece of land. You're effectively, what you're doing is renting a piece of land from everyone for as long as you want it. And for as long as you're using it, you should pay a proportionate ground rent to the community, also called the land value tax, but I don't like that name. Now, what you then do with those community ground rents is obviously a matter for debate. If you're on the right-hand side of the spectrum, you might use them to cut taxes. If you're sort of more in the middle of the spectrum, what you might do is actually pay them out directly as a citizen's dividend. And I actually think even if it's only a small amount, that would be quite a cool thing to do symbolically, to remind people that we all have a stake in each other and in a stake in society, that we all own the street, we all own the land. Or the obvious thing you can do would be to reinvest that land value back into the infrastructure to create more land value, including elsewhere, right? So we should be using the overheated land values of London and the Southeast to invest in infrastructure in the Midlands and the North, so that we can have a truly distributed democratic economy. And this land system is the only reason why the North-South divide persists. So this is a nice principle, but there's an obvious problem with it, right? Have you spotted it? Which is, it would take a government of extraordinary vision and courage and political skill. I don't know if anyone's seen one recently in this country. You know, the level of misinformation that a small number of very powerful vested interests would unleash in the kind of misinformation machine, it would make Brexit look like a picnic. Like, they will give you millions in philanthropic donations. They will, you know, give you all sorts, but they are not going to give you ownership of the land. The land is the cash cow, right? It's the money tree. So probably we shouldn't, I mean, I dream of that day. Wouldn't that be amazing? But probably we shouldn't hold our breath, because, you know, none of us are running for Westminster anytime soon. So what can we do instead? I should say, by the way, one of the reasons why we should also have no faith in that is that not only do you see a government not moving in that direction, we see them moving in the exact opposite direction. Literally every, well, not literally, but very close to every housing policy we've seen in the last few years is essentially subsidizing or deregulating the land speculators in some form or another, often dressed up to look like helping people onto the ladder. But actually it's just inflating property prices, which, you know, even as a strategy, is the logical equivalent of trying to encourage ticket touts at a concert to sell more tickets by giving them more, or like paying for another artist to go onto the concert bill. So let's start with the assumption that that's not going to happen, probably, sadly. What can we do? What can we begin to do right now at a more local level? What can we push for? What can particularly our local authorities doing, who are right now are at the forefront of this kind of crisis? What could they do? Well, the first option, the first thing that's one idea that's been put forward is a Green Party activist by the name of Martin Farley. He suggested the idea of land buybacks. So literally, he did the sums, and he worked out that as collectively we could buy every single private rented property in the UK today, and we would actually save the taxpayer £6 billion, and we could save renters £35 billion a year. How mental is that, right? We could just buy them. The second, which is related to that, if we can also get one piece of legislation through, which does have cross-party support already. It sounds really wonky. It's called it's a small change to a piece of legislation called the 1961 Land Value Compensation Act. Basically, what it would do is it would restore the right for local authorities to purchase land at its current use value. So essentially, we could buy the land when it's only worth a few £1,000s a hectare before it has planning permission. Then we could put planning permission on it, and then we could capture the value uplift to pay for infrastructure, etc., etc. I didn't mention this earlier, but I think at the moment the UK gives away £13 billion of money every year through that method, through not doing that method. And the third one is another idea that we and Andy we've been sharing ideas around for a long time, and I'm very much hoping we're going to get to be working on this with dark matter and frankly anyone who wants to, which is looking at the idea of going back to that original contract, that original piece of paper, and saying, well, what if we were to invent a new form of land ownership, which we've called fairhold, which is effectively a kind of opt-in parallel land market. So instead of selling land to speculators, public authorities would retain ownership of the land, and then they lease it, or actually license it, which is like leasing it with interesting public value contractual terms, to citizens or to steward organizations like community development companies or community land trusts, who in exchange pay a ground rent, which can then be reinvested. So essentially, it's like creating the new land economy inside the existing one and just letting it slowly win, right? Letting it kind of slowly opt in. And by the way, that is, councils could start using that tomorrow. And if it was spread at sufficient scale, local authorities could end the housing emergency within a few years for no money. But don't let anyone tell you we don't have enough money to end the housing crisis. It's not about money, it's about the rules of the game. But to finish, the one thing that we absolutely can and must be doing is talking about it, changing the language, because so much of the language around this stuff, the housing crisis, the just build more homes rubbish, is designed to distract and obfuscate from the real issue. Like, we need to stop buying that stuff, you know, and sitting there head scratching and going, oh, if only we had enough money to end poverty. Poverty is a manufactured system. We can stop manufacturing poverty. We need to like lose these kind of false framings and get the system into daylight. Also, I think we have to show as many people as possible, not just critiquing this system, as I've just spent quite a lot of time doing, but actually helping people imagine a different relationship with land. You know, imagine a Britain in 10 years' time where everyone has basic level of security, you know, where you can live on the same street you do now, but the house is twice as beautiful and the monthly cost is half as much. And the shops at the end of the road are occupied by small local businesses. Money's being invested into technological progress and green, you know, green innovation all across the UK. How would that change your life? Let's let people visualize, let people share that dream and see that dream, and then they will begin to see how, and then tell them how easily that dream could come true. So I want to finish with this idea, which is another quote I saw recently, which is from Thoreau, which is, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to every one who is striking at the root. There are so many crises now that demand our work, and we need to work on all of them. And I don't want to be that guy who's like, you all need to work on this, right? You don't. But I also don't want to be that guy, you know, the man with a hammer to whom every problem looks like a nail, just because the land system is the thing I happen to be looking at. But also every day, and you know, the reason I'm saying this stuff is that every day I see people doing this amazing stuff, and I look with frustration and sadness, because I see all this amazing work that's going on alleviating the symptoms, on firefighting, alleviating poverty, trying to promote more sustainable circular construction, on trying to empower communities, you know, trying to encourage better, healthier, more human-centered design, more socially diverse neighborhoods. And I know it won't work as long as we're ignoring the main cause for the opposite of those things. It's like trying to bail out the boat with buckets while there's still a bloody huge tap pumping water in at the other end. Like, it's just been, that tap has been there so long we can't see it anymore. None of this stuff is going to work unless we also can fix this deep, massive system of extraction that's coded into the foundation of our society, this dysfunction in the foundation of our economy, this injustice in the foundation of our democracy. Talking about the land system is not sexy, right? It's not emotive, but it sits at the root of so many of the issues that are flooding across our timelines every single day. You know, it was designed, but like this is the key thing. It is not inevitable. It was designed in the 11th century, so it can be redesigned in the 21st. What we badly need to be finding a way to do is taking the energy of now and shining it, forcing it, directing it and focusing it deep into the system at the issue of land. And that's why I was so enthused when I saw the Amara Spence's Black Land and Spatial Justice project. Like, which is basically taking this energy and booming it past the obvious stuff that's easy to see. It's equally wrong and equally terrible, but down into the boring stuff of land, because that is where we will make really, really big change. So obviously, I don't know what, I think it's on something like 14,000 at the moment. Let's just get that over the line, because it should be over the line by 1 million. And with that, I'll shut up. Sorry, Immy, for going on a bit too much.
You always say that to me. You always say sorry for going on, and I'm just here like, please don't stop talking. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alastair, for that comprehensive run through, and also because first, and then we'll get into some questions, right? But like, she's doing a lot of like visceral, embodied being in the future work, where you literally imagine that you're having to grow your food in your house and everything like that. And then she was like super honest about the fact that even seeing all of that and knowing all of that, then wandering around life, seeing that everything we're doing is just not leading us to the right future. And she said that there's like this second order effect that she thinks that has on her, that is, very human and normal, where she just feels like completely disappointed and stuff all the time. And so I just wondered, like, what you said at the end there about just watching all this work happen, and that at the foundations of this, it's not going to topple the problems that are underneath and driving it all in the first place. And I know that there's team members in Civic Square team who are like, I literally can't look at anything anymore now without like asking about land. I can't support a crowdfunder that's just asking for the rent for a shop, because I'm like, what are you going to do in the 12 months afterwards? Like, it's become so like ingrained in us. So I just wanted to ask you first, like, what's it like for Alastair, being like seeing this and then trying to function in like practical ways to move forward. And then I've got some actual questions from the audience as well.
Thank you. I mean, that's very nice of you to. It's very nice of you to ask that question. This is something I worry and think about all that time, because it can really like. I don't know if you're familiar with the Cassandra complex. So Cassandra was a figure. Cassandra was a figure in like Greek mythology, where her punishment is equivalent to being sent to Hades, and her eternal punishment was to be able to see things clearly, but nobody listened to her. And the Cassandra complex is a thing which you very, very often find in kind of middle-aged plus white males. And it's really dangerous. I think it can be really quite corrosive. And so I'm struggling with that, of how I balance trying to say, everyone, there's a really big thing over here, but without becoming a horrible, boring person. And there's this weird paradox here, because on one level it looks so impossible because it's so deep, and there's been so many people talking about this, Henry George, for so long, right? People campaigning around community land, commons, etc. for so long, and it doesn't shift. But on another level, paradoxically, it would be so easy, right? It actually has support across both the left and the right, and it doesn't cost any money. Right, that's why it's like this weird. Well, I mean, it would cost money in the sense that it would be like writing off huge amounts of value off the economy, in the same way that presumably, I don't understand the history well enough, as I've learned a lot lately, but when they abolished slavery, right, they paid out these things because effectively it was writing off value from property. So I feel this kind of conflict between it, but I just think things are reaching such a fever pitch now that I'm like, come on, it's now or never, right? If it's going to happen, it's going to happen now. And I take so much energy in a way from young people, younger. It makes me sound really old, but people younger than me, they have a really impressive intolerance for corruption and corrupt systems. And so I'm hopeful that the more people can see this and talk about it.
Amazing, thank you. It's been actually really nice. It's been like such a warm audience and like such a beautiful platform these last 3 days. We actually couldn't have even imagined it, and that like personal bit and hearing from people has been helpful because we are still right, even though we might not feel like it. We're still right in the middle of a pandemic. Our worlds have gone upside down, and like it's really nice to connect with people at a human level and just say, what's going on? How do you deal with all of this?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to kick off some questions from the audience, but I'm going to start off with the one that you told me, the example you told me a few weeks ago, where I was like, sorry, what? Where you said that, talk us through this whole, we could buy everything back and we could save ourselves loads of money. Like, talk it through. Give us 5 steps to what that whole thing is, because it sounded so obvious that I felt like, is this really true?
But basically, if it's profitable, if it's worthwhile for private landlords to buy up a piece of land and extract the tax from it, then by definition, it's equally profitable for the state to do it, right? But we have another incentive, because at the moment, meanwhile, the taxpayer, with our other hand, is paying out 23 billion in housing benefits and however many more millions, I don't have the figure fresh to my head, on homeless emergency accommodation. This is before you even get to all the spin-out costs like children's services, etc. What does it do for children to be living in poverty in this way, to be shifted around emergency housing every 5 minutes, right? So we are paying all these other massive costs, because the truth is that the natural principle, the essential principle underneath, is that land is originally licensed, is ultimately, whether you like it or not, it is licensed by the state, by all of us, to individuals. So that is the organization that is best able to kind of to do it. So yeah, I mean, I'll share the link to his Medium piece. Martin properly sets out his calculations to prove it.
Nice, thank you, because that was just like sounded too good to be, well, not too good to be true, but just like
once you understand the logic of how this system works, because land sits beneath money in a way, right? So strange things are possible.
Amazing. Okay. We've got some more questions. Shaheen asks, Alastair, is it possible to fix something that was designed to exclude 99% of the population, or is it a case of totally dismantling the current system and starting over?
Yeah, this is a kind of theory of change question. I mean, I don't know, and I think we should kind of try and go for all of the above. I think we can take lessons from previous times, and I actually think, like, seriously, the abolition of slavery is I probably should have spent more time studying it, because it probably is a genuinely interesting precedent, even though it was done in a quite crappy way, right? There was a real politic to it. A, it was done in a crappy way, and B, it wasn't really done, right? But there was a real politic to it. So equally, I think and we see this with extreme systems of oppression like communism and Nazism and things like that. These systems do such brutality both to the brutalizers and to the brutalized, that actually a lot of people begin eventually to look for a way out. Also, I should clarify that the number of people who actually benefit from the system versus the number of people who think they benefit from the system is very, very different. If you own your home, you think that you're doing okay from this, but you can't get that money back unless you don't need a home anymore. So it's imaginary money. You're not really wealthy at all. So like, I think it's both, but in the meantime, our approach is very much this idea of, and which goes across all of our work, which is trying to find the smallest possible MVP, right? The smallest possible Trojan horse of the new system that somebody is within the current system incentivized to opt into now. And that's what we're looking at with Fairhold. We're trying to make a system where actually we can take a thing to local authorities and say, this is a no-brainer. We're just going to do that. And so actually, and the moment you start to create that system, it begins to build culture around it, and it begins to outperform. It begins to be a source of optimism, and everyone says, I want to be in that boat.
You heard that here first, people. Fairhold. You heard it here first. It links so much to as well what Indy was talking about before about language, and why it matters so much to even just you know, often, Alastair, you talk about the concept of mud, right? And you know, this language, and the amount of times I do that now when I'm doing talks where I know lots of the property industry are there, is just like you watch the blood just drain from their face. Like, what do you mean? But yeah, you know, that language piece is so important.
Yeah, but I think I would say, by the way, you know, it's not I'm really, and I know that as a white person, I'm not qualified to say this. As a white person who's frankly sitting on stacks of privilege that came from the property middle class family in the property system, but I honestly think that it's inviting everybody to a better version of the future, and I really think that is something that we can do, you know. Like when you give people an opportunity to actually step over it, you know, give landlords a reasonable way to exit. And that's why I quite like the buyback strategy. It just says, we're not, but no more. We're buying you out, no more.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think this is why we make a good team, right? Because I'm fully here for the inviting everyone to a better future. And I think that there's different ways to it, right? There's different ways to the moment where you realize, hey, I need to listen more to what that could be. Like, I can see people in this festival that 3 or 4 years ago would never have engaged with this type of thinking or work before. And so I'm interested in all the ways people come to the conversation as well, because I think that really matters.
And there's been a lot of you know, during the COVID thing, there was a lot of Twitter arguments. There's always Twitter arguments between landlords sort of trying to self-justify, and I sort of just wanted to give them a hug and say, look, I've been there. And weirdly, sometimes in these debates, it's quite useful for me to be able to say, look, I've also been a landlord. This is not a personal judgment on you. You didn't know you were part of this really crappy system. Yeah, it's a game, and we're going to change it.
There's something very different about like that individual, like trying to figure your way and make things work in a broken system, compared to like a whole industry that knows what it's doing, right? And I think I completely agree with that, because we don't really get anywhere by like fighting as individuals, because it distracts us from fighting or like, you know, inviting the future to people who know this game and are playing the game for as long as they possibly can until someone tells them that they can't, right? So I think yeah, I think we make a good team here on this, because I'm a bit more like, you know, let's bash down the doors.
Yeah. Well, we need both. We need both.
You know what to do once we get in, because I'll be like, all right, okay, what do we do now then? I think we're here. We've got some land. I don't know what's next, but yeah, we've got some questions at the end that and I'm not ignoring them. I can see them about like reading and talks and things like that. And is there like someone's also said, is there anywhere an alternative land system you mentioned that is articulated well? Well, funnily enough, there really is. So we'll talk about that towards the end, because Alastair's also done some of these bits of work. But you know what, before we go into some of those, I'm going to go to like I know Alastair loves the like meaty questions, so I'm going to go to a nice meaty one here, which is from Peter Snowden, that says, can we recommon the land without refounding our monetary system at the same time, without land values to back them up psychologically, etc.? Won't the pound, the euro and the dollar collapse?
This is the serious detail thinking. It will. Because we have a fiat currency, and the truth is, as you can tell by the fact that 86% of, by the way, 58% of that is just the land bit, but that's to do with a weird way of calculating the value of buildings. 86% in the value. So, and as a chap up in Scotland who's you know, speaks a lot about this as well, called Chris Cook, is that in practice, land underwrites the pound and the bank and the banking system in the way that, historically at least, oil underwrote the US dollar, and so that is one of the reasons why introducing a land value tax is such a political mountain, because almost nobody wants the headlines of, oh, I wrote 53 trillion pounds off the wealth of the UK, even though it's not real wealth. That's a really hard conversation to have with people, and that's why I think we have to try and find we have this thing is going to be a parallel complementary set of tactics, and it's not just going to be about coming up with new forms of land ownership and land contracts. There's going to be a whole spectrum of those, but also new forms of finance inevitable. And this is something without getting into the detail of Fairhold, this is something we've already encountered, is that actually when you start to build homes as high performance consumer durables, a lot of the mortgage companies will be like, actually you need to do finance separately as well. So this is exactly right, and it's one of the reasons why, again, to make that comparison with abolition.
Amazing. Okay, I'm going to go into one last sort of practical question before I'm going to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what to read, where to find out a bit more about one set of plans that you put out with affordable land and the local homes work potentially. But we'll finish with this last question from Safi Price. Hi, Safi. I know Safi, so lovely to see you here again. How do housing cooperatives play into this? Could we just set up loads of housing cooperatives that buy land, and those that live there have that share, as you mentioned, for the time that they live there, so that the land is always owned by the trust?
Yeah, and there's some Lilac is an example of this in Leeds, and they've been trying to do that. I mean, Safi basically this is it. Go. You've got it. Like exactly this. And so what, if I understand rightly, sort of between the lines, is you're looking for a kind of tactical approach here, again, which is where we could effectively transition, from one to the other. And I actually think, by the way, inheritance could be a really interesting thing, because there's this massive care crisis, especially if there's a sustained drop in prices. A load of people would be looking for an exit. So actually a co-op, and there's an economist called Beth Stratford who's looked at the idea of a national community land trust, which would effectively offer to buy the land out from underneath your own home, but you get to still live in the land. And then the equivalent thing that would be that that could be before you die, but also you can have people, when they die, they choose to defer their house into an alternative model, because the baby boomer, this is brutal, but when the baby boomers die, it's going to have a really weird effect. The issue with I mean, basically, let a million flowers bloom as to what the structure of that is. One of the traditional issues, I mean, I love cooperatives, but one of the issues with cooperatives is they have the insider-outsider problem. So essentially, you still have the incentives of ownership, just in a group instead of as an individual. So it might be a co-op, or it might be some other similar CLT-like structure. But these are exactly this is exactly the kind of thinking we need.
Amazing, thank you, Kate. That's a really important question, and we've been talking about it quite a lot in lots and lots of sessions. And you're absolutely right. And Alastair would have a ton of opinions on this, because I know we've talked a little bit about this. And
yeah, I'm reading it, and I'm like,
lockdown has meant, and all of that. You're absolutely right. This is the distraction he talks about. But what I'm going to say is, because I don't want to go over too much over time, because some of you might want to go over to the ancient medicines in the future with Alia Hasina that's in the sessions. And you know what, if you fancy doing that now, that's absolutely fine, because we're just going to talk about links and places where people can go for the last couple of minutes. And I'm going to say massive thank you to Alastair now, but I'm going to invite Alastair to maybe just stay in the platform for a few minutes afterwards, and just maybe write a few comments to that question. But even on my behalf, I have to say lots of what you've said is absolutely true as to why we're struggling to fight, and we're stuck on this treadmill where we just cannot step off, because people are working shift work, gig economy, long hours, paying high rents. You haven't got the time, the energy, care, elder care, younger care, poor health, bad air. This is the whole story playing out in one go. So yeah, thank you so much for that question. I'll ask Alastair to just any questions that we missed, he can add in here. But Alastair, just want to say huge thank you, as always, for laying out the bigger picture. After laying out the bigger picture, giving us a bunch of routes out of it, tactics, pragmatic ones, things that are so obvious, why aren't we doing it? Bigger ones that are really about dismantling and rebuilding, and all of that. So really appreciate that. Could you maybe just finish off with like a couple of places you would like people to go, or things you'd like them to read, maybe a signpost to sort of affordable land, and we go from, and then we'll just say bye.
Yes, sure. First, obviously, thank you, Immy, and the whole team, and also thank you, all of you, frankly, for being my collective therapist for the last hour. So in terms of things now, Andy and I worked on a bunch of stuff which is up there. If you go to opensystemslab.io/affordable land, as my thinking and all of our, we're constantly learning and evolving that. So at some point that will get updated and get replaced. That's and what I've done there is also I've tried to hyperlink everything in that text to some of the stats and things that I used, and I'll keep trying to do that, and also trying to hyperlink. I need to collect more precedents, because there are precedents for things like Fairhold in different ways around the world. So if anybody knows about those things, or equally, if someone who's really, really working in this space and is interested in working together, please tweet at me.
Amazing. I'll fully back that up to tell you that Alastair's like always putting his stuff out to say, like, hack it, tell me more, tell me what you think. There's no end of work to do. I mean, we've talked about land today, but there's loads of stuff that they're doing in tech and in planning and in physically building homes. Some of you will be totally new even to the WikiHouse project and what that did and what it's doing even currently around the world. So there's loads of stuff to dig into here. If you're interested in it, fascinated by it, we can do something in a couple of weeks or a month or two in the Department of Dreams around more of those ideas. Alastair's got picture after picture of places where people are testing, experimenting, possibilities, how people have used the technology, the ideas. If you're interested, just give us a shout, and in a month or two, we'll do a follow-up sort of tactics and pragmatic session for the hundreds of you that are in the festival and thinking, what does this all actually mean? On this note, I'm going to say a massive thank you to Alastair, and I'm just going to signpost you to your left of your screen. There's some sessions. There's a lovely session with Alia Hassana, and if you don't know Alia, just go, because she'll make you belly laugh, right? She is just such a brilliant soul. And say thank you to Alastair, and I'm actually going to leave you all with the call to action of the crowdfunder of Amara Spence that he talked about. I think it's kind of a travesty, if I'm honest, that it's like lingering around 14 grand when even the total amount would have been a tiny bit in the pocket of either philanthropy or development. So if you can get online, share it, pledge, send it to anyone who can invest, amplify it, and it's not about whether that first step solves a problem. It's the fact that we get more and more people attention on the problem, and most importantly, that Black people are centred in a historical injustice that is absolutely decimated their people and the ongoing livelihoods. A lot of stats came out today about the difference between white households and the wealth they hold, including housing today, and Black households. It's like an order of 10 or 20 in some accounts. So, this is all linked. So one call to action, if you enjoy all this free content, is to go and do something with it, share it, tell someone, care about it, support it, amplify it, tweet about it, Facebook, do anything you can. We'll share the link in the chat in a second. But if you go back to the reception, there's a link tree, and within that link tree is the Black Land and Spatial Justice Project. And on that note, huge thank you, Alastair. Loads of love. And we'll be heading out now. I'll be back on this stage with another incredible project, the Winnipeg Boldness Project with Diana Rusin at 4:00. Until then, go and have a look at some ancient medicines in the future. Have some good fun with Alia, and see you back at 4. Thank you, everyone.